I was born an eighth-generation Georgian, 121 days after Lyndon B. Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act in 1965. That means that I grew up in a South that was radically different from the one my white ancestors knew. And while the arc of our beloved region's history has bent towards justice over the course of my life, what it means to be Southern has changed too. So I want to find out, what does it actually mean to be Southern in this modern world, from ordinary women who make their little corner of the South a better place, who have bloomed where they were planted and have led extraordinary lives. So y'all grab a seat at the welcome table and join the conversation. We're delighted you're here. Hey, I'm Stacy with Down South House and Home. Y'all, I am so excited. After years of being away from the microphone, I am finally bringing my podcast back. I had just gotten started with the At the Welcome Table podcast when the pandemic hit. And then my husband, Chuck Reese, and I launched the online magazine called Salvation South, which I highly recommend if you like Southern stories and poetry. He even has a podcast with Georgia Public Broadcasting. So now that we've gotten Salvation South and its podcast up and running, I decided it was high time we bring back At the Welcome Table. Now, my first guest was chosen with a lot of care. I love talking to ordinary Southern women with extraordinary lives. You know, women who have bloomed where they were planted and made their little corner of the South a better place. And Kate VanCantfort fits that bill. We talk about growing up Southern, what it was like to leave the South, entrepreneurship, and of course, China and entertaining. You will hear a bit of feedback on my voice in this conversation. Fortunately, Kate is such a great podcast guest that I didn't have to do much talking. But I do apologize, and I will try to fix that problem in the future. So y'all settle in for a nice long visit with your new friend Kate. We are so glad that you could make it.
Kate VanCantfort, you are my very first guest on my relaunch of the At the Welcome Table podcast. I'm so honored to have you and so excited. So, first of all, tell us who you are, where you're from, and who are your people.
Yes. So yes, Kate VanCantfort, thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited to help you launch this new thing that you're new again. I think it's going to be wonderful. I really appreciate it. I'm very excited to talk to you today. So yeah, who am I? I'm a 46-year-old full-time solo single mama who has a little 6.5-acre sustainable farm outside of Aiken, South Carolina. And I am a multitude of things. we'll leave it there for now. My home, I claim Milledgeville, Georgia, as my home. That's where I did most of my schooling and most of my growing up. I was technically born in a little tiny town in South Carolina, but I almost never tell people that. And we moved back to Georgia and lived in all sorts of small little rural towns. My parents moved to Habersham County, Clarksville, Georgia, once my sister and I were just out of the house when they were empty nesters, and Daddy's taught up there for 20-something years. But we did have some family roots up there, so it wasn't just like a random move. And then I've called Athens probably more my adult home more than anywhere, lately. But then I was all over the place.
So your daddy was in radio, right?
Yeah. So when you say who are my people, that's what I was going to say. Exactly. So my people are, I would not say we are not deep Southerners, but maybe we will have been impactful Southerners, if I could be so bold. Yes, my daddy and my mama owned small market, little AM/FM radio stations throughout rural Georgia. My grandfather came to Georgia in the late 60s and ran Channel 2 WSB in Atlanta from 68 till the mid 90s. So I grew up in a house full of broadcasters and sports announcers and community engaged people, because we covered everything that happened in town. So from, the obituaries and the farm report to the city council meetings and church services and local remotes at the fishing, place,
Yeah.
or the furniture store or whatever. Yeah. So my people are, loud talking men.
So was there a fine line between news and gossip, on these small town radios?
Yeah, I would say my dad definitely came to it very much with a journalism background.
Mm-hmm.
He did, and I don't know if I've ever heard anybody else do this, except, and it's not the same, but he actually used to do a commentary, like a radio version of a letter from the editor,
Uh-huh.
like an editorial page. But it wasn't always focused on local things. It would just be issues in general. And then usually Paul Harvey played afterwards. And that's that, I would say it was more, it wasn't maybe the stories that Paul Harvey told, but there was some of that. But no, we had actually our news and sports director for a chunk of when I was growing up is the voice of the Georgia Bulldogs.
Now?
Yes. Scott Howard got started at my daddy's radio station. Bill Caiaccio, who's in Georgia Radio Network. There's a whole host. We could just go through a whole host. But yeah, he was actually our sports and news director. Many years we had an actual news director or a sports and news director, and that's what they did. But I spent many hours sitting in council meetings and city council meetings with a little handheld recorder, because there wasn't enough of us to be everywhere. And it was safe because we knew everybody in town. I would just sit there and record the meeting, and then they would listen to it. I didn't provide any commentary or anything, just I was physically there to record it.
Was this child labor?
Yeah. Yes, you have no idea. From cutting commercials to cleaning bathrooms, picking up pine cones out in the field around the tower, to oh my gosh, to TDing, which is technical directing, when you're sitting in the studio and you play the commercials during NASCAR, which is the most painful thing in the world to TD for, because you never know when those commercial breaks will happen. Yep. If it was something, and we used to do an auction on the radio in the wintertime months when it was slow for retail, and every Saturday morning I had to go work the auction at the radio station.
Well, how do you think, like, I grew up in a family with a lot of talkers. And so I just kind of became a very quiet person, and I was an excellent listener. Now you learned how to, did you learn how to talk as like a means of self-defense or survival?
No. Here's the funny thing about my dad. He, as public as he was, not only was he the public face, like my mama ran the business of the radio station. Daddy was the announcer, the outward, with a couple of his other salesmen. But he was also on the vestry at church. He was on the small business committee of the Chamber of Commerce, because he felt that was directly tied to his business. If small business was doing well, then his business would do well. And he was an adjunct professor from when I was in middle school on. But my dad is actually shy. He is actually shy. So my parents never entertained when we were growing up. We did not have people in our home. We did not. I think one time we hosted the basketball team from Georgia College, like out for like Thanksgiving spaghetti supper or something. But we hosted exchange. My daddy's a very active Rotarian. He's a lifelong Rotarian, or almost lifelong. And we've always hosted exchange students, college-age exchange students, through the Georgia Rotary program that does that. So we opened up our home in that way, but not in the way that you probably would think someone that was that active in the community. Yeah. Didn't. We lived out on a farm. It was about 10 miles out of town. When they made the trip out to the farm, they were not going back in. If we were going to have play dates or spend the nights, those parents would have to help make that happen. Mama was like, I'm not driving back in there. And we just were very quiet at home. The radio was always on. My father listened to that radio every moment of the day that it was on. And we always had sports on the TV. If, back in the day out there, we didn't have cable. It was just antenna. And so we got 3 channels. Yeah. So we didn't have much
Be
of
at
that.
Channel 17 on a snow day,
Yeah,
like,
no, yeah, we had all the we had the Macon channels, right?
yeah,
So we
yeah.
had 13. WMAZ was the one that was the strongest. We could always get that, but I think there was a couple of other that came. But WMAZ was pretty much it in the public television. You could count on those two.
So you sent me your resume.
Oh yes,
All
I
right,
know.
here we go. Here we go. Here we go.
Yes,
You have had a
FBI
full.
file.
This is why you're my first guest, because you have an extraordinary life, and it is full of entrepreneurism,
Yes.
independence. So tell me about what you went to college, and then you and I both left the South. So tell me about leaving the South.
Yeah, so I went away to Elon College, which literally was the furthest away pamphlet in my counselor's office, and they gave me money. It was actually between Elon and Sanford in Birmingham,
Mm-hmm.
and I went to Elon. They gave me a full ride, and went there and had all sorts of eye-opening experiences. Their number one at that time, Elon's number one. That's in North Carolina. If people don't know, kind
Yeah.
of middle North Carolina. And their number one recruiting state at that time was Massachusetts, with a lot of private school kids. So there were a lot of Yankees around, a lot of New Jersey, a lot of, it was my first, I
Yeah.
really, I was a little bit of a big fish in a small pond back home,
Yeah. Yeah.
did, that kind of thing, did very well. And, and then went off to this, and it wasn't even a very big school. I didn't want to go. All my friends were going to UGA. That was the kind of the beginning of, we had a truck of girls that went from Milledgeville to College of Charleston for probably a decade. And I didn't want to go to those schools. And I wanted to get out. So I went to Elon. But then over the course of my freshman year of college, 18 people passed away of various ages for a whole host of reasons. My grandmother, it was awful. I was going home for funerals constantly. And I decided to come home to Georgia College, which
Mm-hmm.
I sworn on my life, Stacy, sworn on my life I would never go to school there. And that was at the time when Georgia College was really shutting down. Dr. Spears had left. It had really shifted from this sort of regional institution that it had been. It was starting to feel like a community college. They were at that time, they were actually talking about closing the dorms. And that year was the year that the regents redefined the entire university system in Georgia.
Mm-hmm.
And for one day, it was called Atkinson State College. And then all the
Okay.
they lost their minds. The alumni lost their mind, and they scratched that real quick. And that's when it became Georgia College and State University, the most redundant
Yeah.
name on the planet. And we hired our first female president. That was when
Mm-hmm.
President Apollo came in. So I had gone back, and I had talked to my parents, and I had said, I'm going to come back here, but if I'm going to be here, I'm going to make a difference. I had grown up there. My daddy had taught there, and I had never had a real positive experience with a college student. And so I set about using all of my assets on campus and in the community, and I started a volunteer center that exists to this day there. That I think 2 years ago, we passed 1 million hours of volunteer service.
Are you serious? Just down in little old Georgia College?
Down at Georgia College. They do a service transcript for the kids now, but this was in 1996, before all of this, before service learning was such a big thing,
before the internet was like
internet,
really,
before a lot of these things were happening. But that set me on a course. I could not find a major that I really wanted. I got into the outdoor ed program there for a little while. Not because I really wanted to go climb mountains and those kinds of things, but I wanted the experiential education skills that they were teaching as a methodology in outdoor education. And that's the same methodology that is in service learning. It is another experiential learning model. So I was kind of in there trying to make it work. And I won a fellowship. It was probably the most critical thing that happened to me. Was I won a fellowship with this organization that worked on student activism and student civic leadership. And I got to spend a semester at the University of Utah working in the Lowell Binion Service Center, which was one of the largest service centers in the country at the time. So, and it was
how did you get all the way out to Utah?
It was just where they offered fellowships where they would do a conference during spring break each year that would bring together about 2,000, 2,500 student activists and volunteers. And it was led by students, and they offered a fellowship, and I applied. and it was at the University of Utah that year. It was totally random. So I packed up my Ford F-150 long bed.
You went to Utah and a Ford did it have air conditioning?
I left Christmas night. I did. And didn't have snow chain. I didn't know peededly squat about driving out there. I didn't have chains. I think I built a little platform.
Did you even have cat litter?
Yeah, I had bags of sand. And oh my gosh, I didn't even own a proper coat. I had to stop on my way out there and buy a coat because we didn't have one. And I drove it.
You just got in the truck and left.
Yeah, I just got in the truck and went. I mean, I don't even know where I would have bought a good coat back then anyway, but I bought one in Denver, I think, on my way out there. But yeah, I remember I pulled into Aspen and I called Mama from the payphone at the Burger King in Aspen, because that was about the only place I felt like I could walk into. And I was like, Mama, I'm in Aspen, Colorado. And I remember I saw people. That was Christmas Eve of 1998. That was the Christmas Eve of 1998. And I remember I saw people working on laptops in the Burger King. And I thought, what are those? Like, that's so fancy. But yeah, but I went to Utah, and that Martin Luther King weekend, actually, I went with a big group of this sort of environmental volunteer group out of that big service center. They had all these little teams that did different kind of service work. And I went camping in the San Rafael Swell in southern Utah in January of 1999 and about slap froze to death. Yeah. Because I took my Baines Army Store cotton flannel sleeping bag I'd bought in Milledgeville when I was in middle school. And I about died.
Well, it's good in Korea, but maybe not in Utah. Yeah.
So they promptly trucked me into an outdoor store out there in Salt Lake and said, we're going to get you a few things if you're going to be doing this. Because I think it was 18 degrees that first night I camped out there. And we didn't have a tent or anything. We just slept out. And they all had grown up doing it. And so it wasn't nothing to them. And I literally it was that sleep. I think about it now. I don't know what I was doing. But it changed my life. It changed my life. It was the first time. I remember having the two moments. So there's so many moments, but there are two moments in particular. I was having a debate with one of these other students because out there's barely any trees, right? It's just desert. And Salt Lake's in a grid. And if you Salt Lake bumps up against the edge of those mountains, so you can go up on what they call the bench, or you can go up to a few places, and there's you can overlook and see the city. Well, you're not actually looking at the city. You can almost see all the way to Provo, especially at nighttime with all the lights when there's not inversion. And I kept saying, this is bigger than Atlanta. Like, this is bigger than Atlanta. And they were like, you are crazy. Atlanta has millions of people. Salt Lake does not. Like, and I was like, no, this is bigger than Atlanta. I can't ever see this much of Atlanta. And they thought it was hilarious. They made so much fun of me about that. Also, that was the first time in my life I literally felt culturally sick. I walked into the Salt Lake Roasting Company, which to me, it's hilarious that I learned about drinking coffee in Salt Lake City, where the Mormons don't drink coffee. But they had this huge roaster and coffee shop, and we didn't have coffee shops at home back then. Not 1998.
Right.
There was Blue Sky in Athens, maybe, and I don't think I had ever been brave enough to walk in there. I wasn't that cool. I wasn't walking in there. I was too small town. But we walked in there. We were meeting up to do some planning or whatever. And I walked in, and it was slap full of people, like probably 300 people. Like, it was upstairs and downstairs. It was packed full. It was a huge space. Lots of people studying. And I look around as I'm standing in line to try to figure out how to order something from a coffee shop that I don't know anything about. And I literally started to feel queasy, and I had to sit down. And Stacey, it was the first time I had ever been in public in my entire life with only white people.
Oh. Wow.
Yep.
Because everywhere you had been.
Everywhere.
Yeah. It was
I
just,
mean,
it was just all white
church
people.
would have been the closest. Church would have been the closest to
Yeah.
being, and that, but
It was
that, if
segregated
we
out in
had
the South.
300 people at St. Stephen's Episcopal Church, we'd have fallen down out of a miracle that there would have been 300 people in that Episcopal church. There are like 30 of us, not 300 of us.
Right.
So, yeah, and even then we had a couple of families of color that attended occasionally. So that would have been the closest, but it was never 300 people. But it was
Right.
just this massive, and I just sat there and just, it just felt so bizarre to me. And I mean, I didn't have words for it at the time. I just remember when it dawned on me that everybody in there was white. It just, and it started an interesting, Salt Lake is a really interesting place. It is more than 50% Mormon, but not much more than 50%. But like the West Jordan Elementary School, at least back in 1998, spoke something like 50 different languages in that elementary school. They have one, because of the missionary style of the church, they travel the world and people come back there. So they have a lot of folks that have come because of mission work, and then their families come. And if you go into certain parts of Salt Lake City, that was the first time I had Afghani food. That was the first time I saw a Methodist Hawaiian sort of luau practice. I saw more different cultural practices in that city because of this other 48% or whatever that is so diverse, that it was the first time that I was in a place that was not just black and white. Or, by the time I was at the end of high school, we had a touch of Hispanic folks in Milledgeville. And we had Filipinos in Milledgeville for a while, so they were kind of there, but I think people just kind of considered them white and didn't really think. But I think that's kind of how it was. Not, those are conversations I had later in life. But and while I was there, that was that first time when having left home, where I had to sort of speak for an entire region.
Yeah.
Right.
And what did they think about you?
Well, I ended up very quickly being in this little kind of supper group that we made. We were so proud of our little fancy selves that we were all being these smart scholars, and we wanted to sit around and chew the academic fat about things. And, so we would get together a little bit more than once a month, and we would host a dinner that had something to do with some experience that we had. It started because we would run into each other in the hallways and say, "Oh, did you hear that? Have you read this? Have you done it?" So we decided to just start meeting and doing this. And so people had all sorts of experiences. One girl had been doing a study abroad in Laos, and she hosted a traditional Laotian meal. Like, we sat on the floor in her apartment, and she taught us all these sorts of things. So I hosted a Southern meal. We read Flannery O'Connor, and I just cooked all traditional Southern foods, and I did a lot of the adding the nuance to the Southern stereotypes that you run into when you leave. You have to. I find that leaving the South makes you hone your Southernness.
How so?
It's a sharpening and a refining. You also learn what's important to you from home and the things that you decide to cling to, right? It really makes you decide what are the important parts. But for me, we were getting a lot of questions about, right, this was right around the time they took the big fight over the Confederate flag in South Carolina still being flown. And so that was on people's minds. And I was definitely not as nuanced as I am now, or knowledgeable now, about my own taught racisms and assumptions. But I did feel, even back then, something that I have felt all along, which is there's got to be a broader room for what our racism in the South does look like. That it is not just burning crosses and beating people. Like, those things have definitely happened. There's still a lot of hatred. But for a lot of Southerners, it's not about hatred, and yet we're still racist. And we don't have room to reconcile those things. And so that began there, of me saying, what you think, isn't exactly it. It doesn't make everything right, but it's not quite what you think it is.
I think, having left the South, to go to grad school, so much of like your thoughts about race are like the wallpaper. It's like my mother's had the same wallpaper for 40 years. I couldn't draw it to save my life, right? You just it's there. And then like I went to Pittsburgh, which was a melting pot. And there were people they were just so loose with their racial epithets, like, oh, you Dago, you Wop. But everybody was in the same bar, shoulder to shoulder,
Right.
enjoying each other's company. They would just make fun of each other's origins.
Right.
And I just never had heard of anything like that, and it's like one thing I noticed in Pittsburgh is that Black people were more equal, but they were more separate. And in the South, they were less equal, but less separate. You're more likely to have an affectionate relationship with someone, a person of color, where in Pittsburgh, it was separate, and that was very that was very uncomfortable for me, and because like when I was in Pittsburgh, like the Black people were my people, like we all had the same roots, like we had the same food and understood good manners and dressing well. I mean, I was in graduate school, so I couldn't dress very well, but it's like you saw Black people in Pittsburgh.
But your face can always be washed, and your hair could always be brushed, and your shirt could always be straightened.
Yeah.
Right. Doesn't matter if you got fancy clothes, but you can always, right? You can always look presentable. Right.
And you can always conduct yourself in a certain way. And it doesn't matter what you're wearing. Good manners transcends.
Good manners are the best thing that you can wear, right? That's what always. Good manners are the best thing you can wear. Yep, exactly. Yeah, I came back. I finished up at Mercer. By then, they had been recruiting me. They had started at that time a new undergraduate degree program in nonprofit management, and that's what I thought. I had this whole, I was not coming out of dire poverty. I mean, we were not living high in the hog either, but I wasn't in dire poverty. So I felt very much so I had a responsibility to, try to, raise all the boats, do what I can, do the good work. And I wrestled with that for years. I still wrestle with that. That was really what drove me. And I really think that was an extension of my father's role in the community and how he saw his responsibility. Here's the thing. My father, I did not know this, and I learned about it through somebody else in our community. My daddy, I said, well, he was in Kiwanis and then he was in Rotary. Well, our Rotary met at the Milledgeville Country Club. Well, that was an all-white establishment.
Uh-huh.
My daddy sponsored the first Black member for the Rotary Club.
Really?
Didn't go well at first.
Really? What happened?
They apparently, I knew nothing about this at the time. Nothing. I learned about this later on. Somebody else in town said, well, your daddy sponsored that first Black fellow for the Rotary, and apparently the first woman. And he tried to also then make him a member of the country club. Wow. Because they were saying, well, there was all this. And he's like, well, they don't have to be a member to come to Rotary. Like, there's a lot of people who were in Rotary who weren't members of our country club was a little heavy on the country at the time. And, it was Milledgeville,
They weren't as highfalutin as they thought they were.
No. I had to pull weeds out of the tennis court every time I went to play tennis. It wasn't that fancy. But, and there's a couple of stories about some things that my mom did early on, but they were not, I would not say that my parents were activists. They were, my daddy, God bless him, and if he hears me say this, he'll probably kill me. He's a lot like Beaver Cleaver. If you put Beaver Cleaver and the Archie, the athletic Archie from the Archie comics from back in the day, that's kind of my dad. Like, Beaver Cleaver was always trying to do the right thing. Mm-hmm. And he was being a good kid. And that's pretty much my dad. Pretty much just, he didn't want to start any business or be loud or be, he doesn't necessarily want to be at the vanguard. He's not an early adopter.
Right. Yeah.
But he has a very classic value set, I think. And he is not going to stray from that. I remember asking him finally, I used to ride with my daddy to all the football games, like on Friday night, because he would announce, do the announce, and I loved going with him. And we would travel to the away Georgia games together. And one of the nights we were in the car, I said, Daddy, you grew up in Virginia. Do you remember things being segregated? Like, do you remember the first time they weren't, or because they never talked about it. And he has one story when he was little of getting his rear end kind of smacked by somebody who wasn't his mother because he had accidentally attempted to drink from a colored water fountain at a store because he was a little boy and couldn't read, and he has one memory of that. But he also, when the movie, Remember the Titans.
Isn't she just great? I could talk to Kate for hours and hours. In the second half of our conversation, we get into China patterns and entertaining, and we also think great thoughts about the South and where it's headed. But before we get back to the conversation, let me tell you about how we stay in business. Down South House and Home makes high-quality Southern home goods with clean, classic designs. We have an entire collection of cocktail napkins with funny Southern sayings, like "Y'all come eat." We have big, thirsty dish towels, like this one that says "Mind your manners," that's perfect to sending off your kids to school with. And then our best-selling Mama Tried tea towel. It will help your long-suffering sister-in-law understand why your brother is the way that he is. But we use the best quality materials that we can find and do everything that we can to bring them to you at a reasonable price. So if you like our podcast, think about picking up a few items in our store. You can buy them for your friends and family and be confident that they will love them. We'll even ship your order straight to their door. And if you have a store, we can do wholesale. And remember, if you are ever unhappy with your order, we will move heaven and earth to make you happy. Now let's get back to Kate VanCantfort and me solving all the world's problems.
So tell me about Southerly Farms. It's SOUTHERLEE.
Right. So I don't usually do cutesy things. I'm not a cutesy girl. And then I went and made a cutesy made up word. So Southerly, LY means of the South, from the South, like a southerly wind, right? Lee is a place of protection, right?
Yeah.
In a storm. So I married those two words into southerly.
Yeah.
So it is a place of the South. It is a place of protection.
Yeah.
So that's the farm. Yeah.
And so can people just go to your farm or?
Yeah, I'd love a heads up. I mean, you'd probably pull up and be like, what in the world is this place right now? If you've never seen a little farm in startup mode with one little mama and no tractor or no anything. Right now,
you don't have a tractor.
I don't have any mechanized equipment to help on the farm right now. We're working. I would like, there's a few things I would like. Yeah, I don't have anything like that. It's mostly wooded. It's just 6.5 acres. It basically, sometimes I call myself a farminder, which is bigger than a gardener and smaller than a farmer, a farminder.
A farminder? Okay, I like that. Yeah.
Yep. So right now I don't even know how many beds because I'm constantly adding. It's larger than a normal garden, and there'll be a second one in the front of the house. Basically, out of 4 garden beds, I did 200 arrangements last year.
Flowers.
Flowers. Yep. So it's flowers, all sustainably grown. So that means organic practices, permaculture practices, and what the new term regenerative farming. So this is farming that's capturing carbon. At the end of the cycle, more has gone back into the soil than has come out. Not strictly native on the flowers, but mostly native. Definitely no invasives. Using a lot of the found and pre-existing materials. So the greenbrier, smilax, the little bit of wisteria vine, a lot of muscadine vine. Some of those things. This year I'm about to roll out a calendar of open events. Last year. Ooh. Yeah. So the state of South Carolina does the largest farm tour in the country. It's actually broken up over many weekends. And they have it's not every county in South Carolina does it, but Aiken did it for the first time last year, and I was an inaugural farm on that farm tour. And I'll be doing that again this year. That's around Mother's Day. Our county does around Mother's Day.
Okay.
But that'll be a large event, and I'll have some. Last year I had some vendors. I'll have some more vendors. I had live music, and then I did farm tours and like educational sessions. So I'm hoping to roll out a new garden club membership. It would be a once a month session here, virtual, and then some here. And then my calendar of events. I really want to host a farm dinner this year. That's something I miss doing. I know we'll talk about entertaining, but that's on my list, and that'll hopefully happen this year.
We'll put that in the show notes. Your events and whatever. Like we'll just update that as things go along. So tell me about what is your favorite way to entertain? You said you want to have the
yes. So, I mean, entertaining definitely changes, at least as a single mom. It has definitely changed as my life as a single mom has gone along. What I loved most when I had my farm in Carlton was that we did Friendsgiving, Thanksgivings, or Orphans Thanksgivings. The first year we had 32 people, the second year 38, and the last year, which was the election year, we had 52 people. And we took every single stick of furniture we could outside under the pecan grove, and we did it all one table. Yep. And
did you use paper plates, or did people bring china?
No. If I did use paper, it would be unwaxed and we would burn it that night. But no, I pulled out I got like 7 sets of grandma's china, my china, grandma's china. All
right, so you have 7. Okay, I think I have 5.
It's ridiculous, and I love it. I use it. I mean, bring it out. Come on, bring it out. Right. Yes, and some people brought their. I encourage people to bring their own and bring. They brought chairs too and blankets and their own to-go containers. I cooked the main kind of course staple pieces, and then people brought everything under the sun. So we partially had to move everything outside just to have enough room for all the food that everybody brought inside. That was that house. I grew up in an 1840s dog trot home out on the lower Sandersville Highway on Stembridge Road out in Baldwin County. And that house was not a dog trot style, but it was the second oldest house in Carlton. And it just, it moved, it was but it had huge rooms with the high ceilings like I grew up with.
Yeah.
And it was perfect for it. It had a big wraparound porch. It was perfect for that. Here, I'm in a little farm shack. This is not quite as old, probably more turn of the century, like 1910, 1920. They can't actually pin it down it shows up on the tax rolls in late 1920s, and it just says shack. I'm pretty sure I can tell from the floors it's probably the first 2 rooms in this little house. But so it's funny. The funny little fact, this part of South Carolina, and actually Williston, I'm between Aiken and Williston. Williston in the late 1800s was the asparagus shipping capital of the world. And more asparagus was grown. There's still one really old farm over in Monetta, South Carolina, just on the other side of the county. But they all grew asparagus around here. And the rail line used to come from Charleston through here. I live on the Charleston Highway. And they literally would send ice cars, and they would pick the asparagus and put it on the ice cars and take it straight back to Charleston. And
they buy every stick of it, yeah.
I'm trying to find heritage crowns on some of these old properties around here to find out what asparagus they were growing here. But we are on the fall line here, just like my hometown in Milledgeville, that same fall line of the old coast. So half of our county is sandy and half of it's very clay.
Yeah.
It's the first elevation that you hit coming from Charleston. That's why Aiken was the first a summer colony before the Civil War, and then a winter colony for the industrialists later. We can go into a whole Aiken thing later, but yeah. So the entertaining I like to do, I mean, there ain't a chance to entertain that I would not turn down.
What's your secret?
I love those big gatherings, like this Thanksgiving.
Do you love the big gatherings?
Oh yeah, I do.
So what was it like, because I would find a big gathering a little intimidating. And so like, what's your sort of like hack for, a big event?
For a big gathering, it's definitely, if there are some things that you want, like at an event, but you're afraid of taking all of it on, definitely assign some of those. Like if it's a big, big event like that, even if the whole thing's not a potluck, but you got a best couple of girlfriends that are going to come be a part
Yeah.
of it, assign some of those, or they do it really well, assign some of that out.
Mhm.
I want people to feel homey. I take
Yeah.
my indoor furniture outside all the time. I use
Yeah.
China all the
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not. I don't. I don't shy away from using like yeah. You're probably never going to be fed on a paper plate in my house. Probably
Well,
not.
like younger people are not investing in China, or it's too fussy or whatever. But it's like I go to a lot of thrift stores, a lot of Goodwills, and there's beautiful pieces of China that are just sitting there collecting dust. They need a good home. It's like, and I've never seen a deviled egg plate that I won't rescue
I know.
from a Goodwill.
I know. Me too.
And so like try to help younger people understand, like collecting those pieces of china is really sustainable.
Right. It is. It is. It's absolutely sustainable, and it is only fussy if you think it's fussy. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's just, I don't know where that came, but that's a fussy thing to do.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I years ago, I don't know. I mean, I'm talking when I was early 20s. I swear Martha Stewart. Well, I think it was probably when Ironstone first became really popular again, and she just said, "Buy all the white china you can buy.
Yeah. Yeah.
Buy white. Just buy white." And so, I would say to the younger kids, if they're interested in that more modern look or that more, to just buy white china, and it doesn't all have to match.
No.
It doesn't have to match. I love that, and you're not going to find the same quality,
Mm-hmm.
even in, Miss Magnolia, and Joanna's stuff at Target. I mean, I don't hate
From
that.
china. Yeah.
I don't hate that stoneware look, but I'd be hard pressed to believe that I'm gonna have that plate, 30 years from now.
Well, like this is my orchid from
Yeah.
the Flower Guild. I revived it.
Huh?
Goodwill, and then Goodwill. That's
Yeah.
just a little red plate.
Yeah.
And I've got all of $4 invested in that, and it just makes me look all so
Right.
fancy,
Right.
right?
Right. And that's better than going and buying the plastic one for $15 at the Lowe's.
Yep.
That's
Mm-hmm.
not going to do as well, that you can't clean, that you can't repurpose for something else.
Right.
So, I
Full of
think,
toxins.
right. It's just, I just can't wrap my head around not. I think the fussiness comes in more around the old sort of Emily Post kind of thinking, and I don't even know if Emily's really who's responsible for this, but that like you had to know the right pieces of china to set out at the right, it's some of that, but people under 70 aren't doing that anyway.
Well, I think she cataloged all the asparagus tongs and the cold meat fork, and those sorts of things, and I actually am planning on doing, like I've collected a bunch of that stuff.
Yeah.
And so I was going to like do like a little, what is this, sort of thing.
Yes. Right.
And,
exactly.
and you can get that in silver plate, and I use it. I used it last week when I had some family over, and, and it's less expensive than what you pay for at Target or anywhere else. Right. And it's more beautiful. And, and the thing is like you move to, if you pack your Ford F-150 and go to Utah, you can just donate it back to Goodwill. That's right. All you have to do, or give it to a friend. Yep. And it's just like I find that there's a cognitive disconnect between young people's like eschewing the China because it's too fussy, but then they'll buy stuff from China, from real China, for a lot more money, and it's not. I mean, it's toxic. It's not going to last.
the emissions that it took to get here, the human rights violations of where it's met. I mean, we could just tick down the list of all sorts of things.
Yeah.
And there's all sorts of benefits of using these things. And I think there's been a shift towards the mid-century modern and some of the young generation. I think there are some things that we could do. I've had to kind of come to terms with social media. I'm just old enough that it's not first nature for me. But I do try to show beautiful images of the things that I use and the things that I do. I definitely did that when I was at the shop. And the way that I styled things in the shop and the way that my shop looked was a much more modern look. It didn't look like the kind of granny ways that maybe that it could have looked or could have felt. And I know that had something to do with it. I know that has something to do with how they see it. So I think some of that conversation, and quite honestly, people that were not so young liked to see things being reused in a different way or in a different kind of setting. Or, I have early on, I was a part of some of those empty bowl meals that were often used to help support like a food bank or a soup kitchen or something. A lot of times they were potters would make the different bowls, and your ticket let you pick one. Well, we did one that was all vintage.
Oh, did you really? Yeah.
Potters. So, it's, again, just like different ways to think about some of those pieces. There's always fun things to do in terms of like at the holidays or just any gathering. If you want to do a little group activity or gifting event, is to do things like a little white elephant, but it's all vintage pieces, right? Or that's your little place setting gift, your hostess gifts or whatever.
Exactly. Well, all right. So, we could talk each other into a little busy thoughts.
I'm trying not.
And we're gonna have to come. You're gonna have to come back. We're gonna have like a whole lesson on sustainability because I feel like we need more of that. So let me ask you, like, what is the best advice you ever got?
Oh my God. To be true to you and to take the time to know, to be able to hear that.
Yeah.
And
all right, so what advice would you give to your 21-year-old self?
Life is not going to go the way you think it will.
Yep. Yeah.
So kind of like my old basketball coach would say, so stay loose. Like
stay loose.
Stay loose with it. Because let me tell you, man makes plans and God laughs.
That's right. So what advice would you give to 21-year-olds today, like living in this world?
I do not feel as connected to that group. Like I haven't been around as much with those folks. I think less so advice, but more so a conversation of, it can feel like things are really dark right now.
Yeah.
But it also felt really dark in 1997.
Good. Yeah, it did.
We had a hole in the ozone. We were beating a guy in the streets in California. We were, the towers fell.
Right.
The towers fell right after that. We didn't know what was going to happen with Russia. The one wallet, it just everything. Things are often very dark. And I'll go back to sports metaphors. You got to get in the game.
Yeah.
You got to get in the game.
Yeah. Yeah.
You can't, we can wring our little hands all we want to, but we got to get in the game. It takes all of us, and we got to get in the game.
You and I both spent a lot of time trying to get out of the South. And once we got out of the South, we spent a whole lot of time trying to get back to it. What is one thing you would change about the South now?
So I have mostly spent time in the South and out of the South in very, very rural communities. That's been the most constant thread. Salt Lake being probably the biggest place. And then I did live in Atlanta for a hot minute. but mostly very rural communities. Sassily, maybe inappropriately sassily, I have been on record saying to leadership in small towns, well, we can work on this, or I can just wait because one of us is going to die before the other. And it's probably not going to be me. And that's probably the thing I would change, would be some of there's a mindset. It's not just a clinging to the way things have always been, but this people who haven't gotten out of the South.
Yeah.
That, and like, oh my God, there have been some very weird versions of this in my life lately where there's just this small-mindedness, and I don't mean that the way that normally means, but this lack of experience, and then this like fact checking of like, well, don't you have the same information I have with somebody else who's also never left, and maybe doing that 2 times, and like that being the definitive answer on something because they've never been anywhere else, and it's like,
yeah.
And I don't understand it in this day and age because we all have the internet.
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
You can know things. You can know real things, and you can use them. And this goes for like, I mean, we are constantly fighting like the lack of the enforcement of like planning and zoning committees, and so we're having all this unchecked growth, and we're not protecting things. And it's like, this is not a new problem. This is a problem that's been around for a very long time, and there have been best practices from like the American Planning Association for 2 decades. This is not unknowable information. So just some of this sort of almost like willful ignorance. Or, you know, not that they just need to adopt I'm not here to say that you need to grasp every newfangled thing that comes along, but I would like us to have more value of educated curiosity. Maybe that's the way to say it.
Yeah.
You know, like, what is the best thing I could do for my small town? What is not just what's always been done, but if I love a place, what is the best thing I can do for it? And we are deserving of the best things.
Yeah.
We are deserving of doing the smartest, best, most useful thing because we love our places, we love our people, and I wish I could just sprinkle that little fairy dust over the South.
I see, a lot of pockets of the South disappearing. That I think, like we need to keep that. And I think that educated curiosity could bring in those best practices to help keep that.
Right.
Because because like the availability of internet, the availability of internet is going to allow people who have advanced degrees to live out in the middle of nowhere, live in South Carolina, and and have access to information while still keeping that really rural feel. That you just don't want another Hardee's, and you don't want another Burger King, or whatever. What's the
another Dollar General?
There's a Hardee's, and then you got a Burger King and a McDonald's. Depending on how wealthy the town is. Like, how do you keep like that small town feel without having commercial America come in to feel like you've made it?
Like, the best food in Williston is at the brand new, I mean, the BP is brand new, but that guy has had a little food stand inside the gas station, like 3 iterations of the gas stations. So literally people are going to the gas station to get their Christmas casseroles in Williston, South Carolina. That's still happening, right? But but there's 7 empty storefronts that are just falling in on themselves in that town. I would give my eye teeth to put a little bookstore, coffee shop, an organic one at that. And I don't even have to go hitting them in the face that it's organic. If I don't tell them, they'll never ask. They won't know they're getting healthier coffee with healthier syrup. I won't be giving them the whole town diabetes, but other people, because of the internet, will know that it's there and will want to come, right? Like, there are these things that we can do that and it would still have the same little coffee clutch. It's probably been without a place to do the coffee clutch for who knows how long now because things have closed up in our little towns. And And this is not just specific to the South. This is true of every rural place I've lived, from the Northeast to the Great Plains to the desert Southwest. There are things, people love small towns. They are in love with the mythology of them. But we have to be a little bit proactive in how we are open to some things. I feel like it's like we have to change to stay the same. It's like we have to change.
Yes.
We got to be loose. We got to play our defense loose so that we can make the big play, right? And because the people are hungry for it. People want authenticity.
They do. Like Eatonton, which is very close to Milledgeville.
Yep.
The bank there is in the center of town. Still closes on Wednesday afternoons, right? Just like it did my granddaddy's day.
Around here does. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I like that. And you just plan your day around it. But we have the Georgia Writers Museum, and then they just opened a coffee shop, and you got the Uncle Remus Museum, and it all still feels very old Eatonton, but that's going to take some modern thinking to keep it that way.
Yeah, that's exactly. I could do that again and again and again in different places, and it's like, here we have, so one of the big roads in Aiken is Whiskey Road, right? This is one of the great names, things I wish they would play up in Aiken. So Whiskey Road, it is now the strip mall road, and they keep putting more stuff out there. Well, they will not plan for any kind of green space. They won't force any of the development anywhere else, and no one likes it. Everyone is constantly commenting how much they hate. They have accidents on there constantly. The traffic is da. So change it. Change it. No one has, and in no town ever has anyone ever said, you know what I really wish this town had? A strip mall section where the traffic sucks and the suicide lanes probably get killed. Like no one has ever said that. So
why is it there?
Why is it there? And this is the thing about when I would talk to younger folks about civic engagement when I used to do this work. This is the politics that matter. The local politics, have you ever gone to a zoning meeting? Could I take you to one? Would you go with me? Or hey, book club, let's go attend the zoning meeting because we care about, just show up and learn. We have not created a culture of accountability and responsibility that somehow we lost in a couple of generations. There was Robert Pullman wrote, Bowling Alone, and some of those books that kind of came out early on. And I don't know where that lack of community connectivity, I personally think it happened when we lost those third spaces, those community living rooms, where you don't bump into each other you don't bump into people at the post office anymore because you don't go there. You don't bump into them at the cafe or the coffee shop or we just don't have those spaces. And we don't have the time, that would probably be the other thing. If I was in charge of the world, one of the things I would change is I personally think we should have a 3-day work week. We cut all the jobs. We make 2 jobs out of every job. We're all worried about where the jobs are going to have all this automation and stuff. Well, we just cut all the jobs in half and make them 2 jobs, and then everybody's got jobs. But we work 3 days a week, and we are citizens 4 days a week.
Yeah.
Then you've got time to do stuff.
That would be fun.
Then you can be on committees, and you can be, think. But I don't think the powers that be really want that. So, or fine, work 4 days a week and be citizens 3 days a week. But we don't have time to be the citizens that we need to be.
Yeah, it can be an extra job. It really is. So, all right. Well, I really feel like I'm so glad that you were my first guest on the relaunch because you definitely are one of the people who blooms where you're planted. You make the world a better place. You're exactly the kind of woman that I want to interview because wherever you go, you make where you are a better place, and that's who I want to celebrate. So
yes, anyway. I'm excited to see as you roll out your guests. I want to meet them all. I know. I feel like I have to have a dinner party.
At your farm. Well, we're going to have you back just for like an educational,
Y'all, I had such a good time with my friend Kate VanCantfort, and I hope you did too. We'll have another podcast out very soon with another ordinary Southern woman with an extraordinary life. And if you liked what you saw today, give us a like and hit subscribe, because we need you to help us celebrate Southern women. See you soon. Love y'all.